I think it's because of this that utilitarianism has had like a very large influence on public policy, certainly from the nineteenth century Britain and the British Empire. It was hugely influential. It's been influential in philosophy, in law, and to some degree in economics as well. But as you said, it's often sort of maligned in the philosophical discussion these days. It's one of these theories that like everyone comes across when you start studying moral philosophy, right? And then it becomes a bit of a uh, becomes
The
sort of a
attacked or
target to
yeah,
attack,
target. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And the main attacks, I mean, some people just, don't believe that such a simple theory can do so much work. But the most common objections probably are that it's in some ways too permissive. So it permits us to maybe commit sort of what seem like heinous acts for the greater good, right? So the classic example here is like um, a doctor has five patients, each needs an organ transplant. Healthy man walks into the doctor's surgery. Seems like the doctor kills the healthy man and uses their organs to save the lives of these other five people. Well, look, let's think of the utilitarian trade-offs here. You've got one person's death on one side, but the benefits seem to be saving five people's lives. It looks like the utilitarian says, look, the doctor should kill the guy and take his organs. Most people think that seems wrong. So utilitarianism seems to permit, like, acts that we intuitively think are wrong for the greater good. Okay, so that's one sort of species of objections. We can talk more about how utilitarians might respond to that. And then another species of objections is that it doesn't permit enough, right? So certain mundane acts that everyone does seem to be wrong on the utilitarian sort of calculation, right? So, for example,
I think we lost you there for a bit. You said, for example, and then after
okay,
that we lost you there. Just repeat that bit if you don't mind. Yeah.
okay, yeah, great. So the other objection is that utilitarianism isn't going to permit certain mundane acts that we think are okay or even good. So, for example, say you have $20, um, you spend it on buying a present for your daughter. Okay. Makes her happier. It's an expression of your love for your daughter. It's just a regular thing for a parent to do. No one thinks that's wrong, right? But it seems like, according to the utilitarian, it might be wrong because that $20 could have been used to produce more well-being, right? Yes, it's made your daughter happier, but if you'd spent it on something else, maybe it would have improved well-being overall. For instance, what if you'd given it to a charitable organization that, like, such as Give Directly? What Give Directly does is it just sends cash transfers to people in very poor countries. Now, $20 to someone in a very poor country means a lot more than a $20 present to your daughter. And so it seems like utilitarianism says the right thing to do here would have been to donate that money to Give Directly rather than to buy a present for your daughter. And that buying a present for your daughter, moreover, is morally wrong. And a lot of people also balk at that, right? That's very counterintuitive. What could be wrong about buying a product for your daughter? So these are the probably the two most common objections to utilitarianism, and I think they're why a lot of philosophers sort of want to come up with a moral theory that can accommodate those intuitions we have about those cases, and that's why they reject utilitarianism.
Excellent. I think this is the perfect segue, in fact, to your dissertation, because I think it's quite funny with utilitarianism, as you did point out rightly so, Nikhil, that it is sort of the the kind of the common target from regardless of your political positions, be it right wing or left wing. The utilitarians are always the bad guys, so to speak. And one reason I've seen, and I'll give you a few examples here. One reason I've seen from uh, more like right wing people is this idea of like telescope philanthropy, and then Charles Dickens, his novel, the way he talks about this idea that, oh, you care about what's happening in some country far away, but you don't care about your neighbor. You don't care about the immediate, what's immediately taking place. Or it kind of left wing, let's say, critique is it's more this the critique which we'll discuss, I'm sure, that the effective altruists get regarding, oh, it's just the idea is, you focus on individuals accumulating a lot of money and trying to, in a utilitarian manner, distribute the money, and there's not enough structural critique. And also, they too bring in this idea of, okay, what about, yeah, does the nature of a human being, whatever that nature may be, and if there is such a nature, does it fit with a normative theory like utilitarianism? So, of course, your dissertation, I misspoke before. I said human nature, but it's actually utilitarianism and the social nature of persons. So, along with what I said, if you could kind of address that critique, that big critique, that the idea of, whatever a human being is, can they, practically partake in a utilitarian sort of society? And then secondly, maybe we could use that to kind of explore what you explored in your dissertation pertaining more to the social nature of a person's, and then it'll go on from there, Nikhil, if that's okay.
I guess what I'm trying to do in my dissertation is yeah, provide a response to, I guess, these two worries. You characterize them as right wing and left wing there. The one
Just
is
for
to
the sake of
criticize the
conversation, I'm not, that's just for the sake of
sure,
conversation.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the first is to criticize the extreme impartiality of utilitarianism. As you put it, like you care about people on the other side of the world just as much as you care about, yourself or your own family. Seems like there's some seems like that might sort of run against human nature in some way. And the second, the more sort of what you characterize as a left-wing critique that utilitarianism is too individualistic. Now, I actually think that there's, and what I argue in my dissertation is that if we emphasize the importance of the social connections between individuals, then we can solve sort of both of these problems that utilitarianism seems to have, right? What I mean by the importance of the social connections between individuals is that everything I do that makes me the person I am is done in a social context that is built up of lots of other people, of their actions, of the meanings that through language and thought and tradition we create together. Um, in the modern world, um, just materially, we rely on so many other people for everything we do every day, right? So, where did your coffee come from this morning, right? What about all the materials in the microphone that you're using to
Yeah.
record this
Yeah. Yeah.
podcast, right? Um, Millions of other people, when you look through these supply chains, right, are integral to like how we each live and the projects uh, that we ourselves have. And moreover, it's our connections with other people that give our lives
M-
meaning,
Meaning for sure.
right?
Yeah.
So that's the sort of key insight, right? That this sort of idea, philosophers have said this there's versions of this in philosophers for a long time and in many different traditions. But like one slogan you hear is like no man is an island, right? We're all connected up together, and what makes you you is other people and their myriad relations to you, right? So once we keep that in mind, um, it seems to me that the idea of taking seriously the well-being of people who are not immediate to you, so not you or your family or your immediate neighbor, but people across this global society, um, appears sort of not in this sense of like I'm giving up something close to me for the sake of something far away for this other person I don't know about, but rather an expression of the fact that in the modern world, we are all part of one. We are all part of one sort of social collective,
Yeah.
right? Um, and everything that um, everything that I do can be an expression of that. And so there's this worry, this sort of right-wing worry that you know that's somehow opposed to human nature. I want to, because there's this thought that human nature is sort of selfish or myopic, right? We care about ourselves, we care about the things we can see close to us. And I want to say, obviously, people often do have those biases, but on reflection, the self and those close to us are not something that you can easily separate from society at large and the people far away from us.
Yeah.
And once we recognize that, making those sorts of trade-offs between those different groups seems a lot more reasonable. Now, onto that more left-wing worry about thought that utilitarianism has a problem with structural change. Um, I basically agree that this is true of the sort of contemporary utilitarianism associated with, say, people like Peter Singer. So their thought is, look, society is how it is. What can I do? What contribution can I make as an individual to improve the world as much as possible? By which, specifically in this utilitarian view, is increase the amount of well-being in the world as much as possible. Um, that's a very individualistic view of action, right? Um, and what that means is it sort of takes off the table certain kinds of systemic change, right? Because say that you think that say that you think there's a problem that, some people are very rich and some people are very poor. This is not good for overall well-being,
Like the
right?
world we live
It
in.
will be right, exactly. So it would be as we talked about before, like $20 means much more to a poor person than a rich person. So it seems like there's a utilitarian case for redistribution there, right? The sort of individualistic utilitarian is going to say, okay, so that means you have a duty to donate your $20 to give direct. Um, but what they're not able to say is, hang on, why don't we change the system so that we don't have very rich people and very poor people, but instead we have an economy that tends to produce more equality, right? And why can't they say that? Well, it's because that's not the kind of thing that it's in one individual's gift to do, right? You want to change our social and economic system, that's going to have to be done by a huge organized collective of people, right? The whole society acting together, or at least a large part of it, right? A social movement or a class, right? Um, Now, if we start thinking in terms of those sorts of agents, right? So not just like, what can I do to maximize well-being in the world, but what can we do together, right? As a society or as a political party, as a movement, as a class, what can we do together to improve the world? Then these more systemic, more ambitious changes seem much more tracked, right? And so what I'm arguing in my dissertation is that both of these problems can be solved by thinking about basically the collective and social nature of individuals.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. I think we can delve a bit deeper into that as we go, because obviously, I mean, if you want, you can comment on this. But one person that's sort of like, let's say the antithesis to your thesis is Bernard Williams, and you sort of address his criticisms of utilitarianism. However, Nikhil, I would like to explore a bit more this idea of well. I'd probably first say this. I probably fall into the more left-wing camp in their
Mhm,
critique of utilitarianism. I do believe, in many ways, in the Marxian sense, that true significant social change only happens collectively. I mean, I don't buy this idea of sort of the one great person, the great, Napoleon-like figure who has the world's spirit taken up by a storm and just changes the world radically. I think a lot of change is in fact structural, it's social, and perhaps there's the radical version of that theory or that worldview would be that ideas don't change the world, but material circumstances change the world, and then in retrospect, we have ideas to rationalize what's already been. I think Nietzsche even makes this point, in fact, in his Gay
mhm,
Science.
mhm,
But I know you said you don't want to comment too much on these speculative questions, but forgive me, I've got a utilitarian philosopher, so I feel obliged to ask
sure.
ask you this. This idea that comes probably more from the right wing, which for me has always been a bit absurd because forget about psychoanalysis or all these theories, just day to day, experientially, I've seen so many times where people clearly aren't acting in self-interest. People clearly partake in self-destructive behavior. I think the kids these days call it self-sabotage. Yeah, that's the term, right? So you'd see it in relationships, you'd see it in work, you'd see it when someone starts something new. People do have this almost self-destructive tendency. I think it's a part of human nature. I think Kafka wrote about it beautifully. A lot of literature, Dostoevsky writes of this idea that there's something almost irrational to our existence, and that's where I think this idea of the social nature gets really interesting. Because again, I misspoke initially. You don't speak of human nature; you speak of social nature, and I'm coming to realize, and correct me if I'm wrong here. Those for you are very different things. The social nature it's probably a different category. So to be succinct, forgive me, how would you respond to that kind of argument that human beings don't act in their self-interest and we even in a more radical sense have this self-destructive tendency where we do things that clearly go against our well-being. In some sense, as Dostoevsky said in Notes from Underground,
Mhm.
man falls in love with suffering in a very dramatic sense, if he puts it. So, what's your kind of counterpoint or your views on that? Let's say.
Yeah, great. So maybe just clarify what I'm talking about about social nature and
It's a
human
good idea.
nature.
Yeah, yeah, yes, please.
Um, so people have this idea of human nature. This has like stronger and weaker forms, right? The weaker form, which I think I agree with, and I think most people would agree with, is that like there is some way that human beings are, and it's not sort of infinitely malleable, right? You can't. There's some things that you just like can't make human beings into, no matter sort of how you educate them, what sort of society they're raised in, and so on, right? So people are, and that's surely true in some sense, right? Like we're all of the nature that like if you put a hand in a flame, it will burn, and we won't like that, right? It's like that is just like the nature of how we are. But then some people have a much stronger view of human nature, right? That extends to sort of a much wider range of social behaviors and attitudes. So people say things like, "Oh, it's just yeah, human nature to be selfish," um, or you see, oh, it's human nature to want to compete with others, or it's human nature for men to want to have as many female partners as possible. You see these sorts of claims. Those those I'm highly skeptical of, right? Because I think if you study any history or anthropology or sociology, like that will just tell you that in different social setups with different sort of ways of living, people do get different attitudes and preferences and so on. And so that brings us on to the question of what I mean by the social nature of persons. And I guess what I mean is here's a weak claim about human nature. A weak claim about human nature is that what we are and how we live is determined by uh, and formed in collaboration with um, other people around us, right? Without them, we wouldn't have the same meanings to our activities, right? There's certain activities you just can't do on your own, or if you do them on your own and no one else cares, like they don't have so much meaning, right? You can't really make art without an audience for it, for instance, those sorts of things. We think our thinking is obviously like often determined by language, which only makes sense in a society. Um, the work we do only really makes sense if there's other people sort of consuming the products of our
Recognition.
labor,
Yeah, yeah.
and we rely on everyone else producing the things that like help us to subsist,
Yeah, and
right?
I would
So
also add
that's so that's a, so that's yeah.
no, sorry, I was just going to say
No,
one
go ahead.
other really, I think, important thing here is, sorry for the interruption, the cognitive philosopher Andy Clark, he makes the point of the extended mind, where even our
Great.
decision making is very much, we almost outsource our decision making to our social world. So even something that we think is our most deep, intimate decision is in some sense influenced by our social reality. I just thought that'd be important to add too, but please continue, Nikhil.
Great, yeah, great, yeah. So we're getting new theories and new results all the time that just show like how much we rely on other people, right? Okay, so that's a weak claim about human nature is that like what we do sort of is hugely dependent on other people, right? That's what I mean by there's a social nature of individuals. Now, this also explains why the stronger claims about human nature don't really work, right? Because, okay, put us in a different social environment, we're going to have different outcomes from that, right? We're going to become a different kind of person, right? So you can take someone with, um, my exact DNA, raise me in, um, you know, 16th century France, contemporary China, um, all the very different social environments to one I was actually raised in of early 21st century UK, uh, or even just raise me in a different family within that one society, or expose me to different things, raise me around different people, and because my identity is so socially mediated, right? I'm going to come out quite different, right? So then these stronger claims about human nature seem to falter. Now, what does this mean? I mean, you mentioned in particular the claim that sort of it's human nature to be sort of mostly interested in one's own well-being and
Well,
do what's good for
I,
for
I,
yourself, right?
I was sort of, in some sense, rephrasing or reiterating the right-wing
Mm,
claim. Now, I don't agree
right,
with
yeah.
that. What I was trying to say was, well, there's something even beyond that where it seems that we aren't even interested in our own well-being too. However, and I'm sorry to kind of go on a bit of a tangent here. I think through your this category, through your concept of the social nature, that too could be,
Mm,
you could even argue against that, saying that yes, because human nature is so murky, the social nature could fundamentally change the so-called human nature of a person, because it's not a given kind of an objective fact of brutal fact of the universe of being as such. Regardless, yeah, continue, Nikhil.
Yeah, so let's go back to this claim that there's some sort of natural impulse to look after our own well-being. So this could be spun as like good or bad for utilitarianism, right? So I think you're spinning it in the way that it seems bad because utilitarianism says, um, look, the right thing to do is to maximize overall well-being, not just your own. And sometimes that might mean, we talked about trade-offs again, sacrificing some of your own well-being for the good of other people, right? And I said how like that can be made to seem more reasonable by noting the ways in which yourself and other people are intimately connected through all these social connections, right? Um, So, is it a worry if it's like human nature to look after your own well-being, but a moral theory tells us to look after everyone's well-being? Well, that depends on sort of the place that you think moral theory should have. Right. I know there are some philosophers who are going to say, look, I don't care about human nature. What I'm saying is what the right thing to do is. If people don't do it,
It's their
that's on
fault.
them. They've done the
Yeah,
wrong thing,
yeah.
So the correct moral theory is the correct moral theory. Human nature is human nature. If they don't match up, all that shows is that we're all sinners, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure I do agree with that, right? I think moral theory should have something to say to the kind of creatures that we are,
For
right?
sure.
So if it actually is the case that it's impossible or just feels awful to follow a moral theory because of something about how humans are, right? Then I do think that's a problem for the moral theory. right? So that means I'm going to have to say something to the effect that humans don't need to be selfish in this way. Um, and yeah, I mean, you were pointing to ways in which people's people can be self-destructive, right? And I would also point to the ways in which people can be altruistic, right?
That's fair.
You just see this all the time. People do things that are not really in their interests, right? People, stand in line in the rain to cast a vote in an election because they think one candidate is better for the country than the other candidate, and they don't get anything really out of voting, right? But they give up their time to do it, right? People people look after people look after other people, not just
Common
not
decency.
just their family
Yeah.
members, but within families in particular, you see this. People donate money to charity. Um, people there's a whole range of altruistic behaviors that people engage in, and what I think is going to be important in making society better in terms of this idea of overall well-being is going to be harnessing those more altruistic motivations that people do have and making that a larger part of our society and economy, and decreasing the sort of selfish motivations that
I
people have.
I couldn't agree more, and this is why I think I was trying to demarcate between human nature and social nature. Nikhil, the reason being because for me, even let's say the most self-destructive act we could think of, a person committing suicide. That's the
Sure.
end. There's nothing beyond that, right? But you could even argue, I mean, we can't live in a utopian society. However, if the reason a person does such a thing is because they're deeply suffering inside, they in a deep sense of existential pain and they it's unbearable. It could be due to social circumstances. It could be due to economic strife. It could be due to a variety of things. It could be due to the fact that climate change anxiety or the anxiety of just our volatile, capricious times in the political atmosphere, or it could be the social media. I mean, there have been many cases where social media has directly led people to self-harm or even committing suicide. So, and all of that, in my view, is still a part of the social nature of a person, and that directly impacts what we call the human nature. And as you rightly argue, yes, we could structurally, through a utilitarian ethic, even uh, create a society that perhaps allows people to bring out their more of their altruistic side than this other self-destructive side. So I think that's a good category that you've kind of created, which I do appreciate, Nikhil.